going on one of those rides, please get a sports bra. And if you've got hemorrhoids, just forget it.
She was the face that lit up Australian television for decades. Cheeky, radiant, impossible to ignore. But behind the laughter, behind the catchphrase ding dong, was a woman exhausted by secrets. What really happened behind the studio walls where Denise Drysdale reigned? And why do so many of her former colleagues still refuse to speak her name without a pause? Denise wasn't just a television host. She was an institution. Crowned twice as Queen of Pop, she crossed effortlessly from music to comedy, from variety shows to morning television. She was adored by millions, yet infamous among insiders for backstage tensions, emotional outbursts, and stormy feuds that would become television folklore. Underneath her legendary wit lay a relentless pressure to perform, to smile, to entertain, even as her personal life quietly crumbled. As years passed, the scandals mounted. Abrupt resignations, tabloid rumors, and whispers of on-set blow-ups that networks worked hard to silence. The same charm that made her a national treasure also became the spark that ignited some of the industry's most volatile episodes. Was Denise a victim of a brutal entertainment machine, or an uncontrollable force who burned every bridge she crossed? This is not the story they told on TV. This is the story they tried to forget. She was born in 1948 in Melbourne, a post-war child raised in a working-class family that valued grit over glamour. From a young age, Denise Drysdale was drawn to the stage, not out of vanity, but because it felt like home. At just 10 years old, she was already dancing professionally. By 16, she had a regular spot as a go-go dancer on Commotion, a music TV show that made her an overnight sensation. Australia had never seen a teenage girl move like that on national television. She wasn't just cute, she was electric. The 1960s ushered in a new era, and Denise rode the wave. With her husky voice and unmistakable charisma, she transitioned from dancer to singer, snagging 2 Logie Awards and winning the prestigious Queen of Pop title twice in a row. But it wasn't just her music or her looks, it was her sheer presence. She had a wild sparkle in her eye, a kind of unfiltered honesty that audiences couldn't get enough of. In a world of polished TV presenters, Denise was refreshingly real. By the 1970s, she was everywhere: variety shows, talk shows, comedy sketches. She toured with legends like Ray Charles and Roy Orbison, and even made appearances on US television. But it was the Ernie Sigley Show that cemented her legacy. As Ernie's cheeky sidekick, Denise became the comic foil Australia didn't know it needed. The chemistry was electric, the banter unrepeatable, and viewers fell in love with her all over again. Yet even at the peak of her fame, trouble was brewing behind the scenes. Denise had a reputation for being difficult, a word often weaponized against strong women in showbiz. But in Denise's case, there were real incidents: walkouts, shouting matches, last-minute cancellations. Producers adored her talent, but feared her temperament. Colleagues described her as brilliant but unpredictable. One even said working with her was like holding a live wire, thrilling, but you never know when it might shock you. Still, her career pushed on. In the 80s and 90s, she became a staple of daytime television, hosting everything from The Circle to Hey Hey It's Saturday. She reinvented herself as a kind of TV auntie, warm, funny, opinionated. But age didn't soften Denise. Her unfiltered style remained, and with it, a trail of controversies. Inappropriate jokes, abrupt exits, and on-air moments that made headlines for all the wrong reasons. It was during this period that the media began turning on her. Tabloids painted her as unstable. Rumors swirled about alcohol, health issues, and professional clashes. Denise denied most of it, or laughed it off. But those close to her knew she was fighting battles far beyond what the audience saw. As time went on, her appearances became less frequent. TV began to favor younger, more controlled presenters. Denise, with all her chaos and charisma, no longer fit the mold. But she didn't disappear. Not completely. She remained a cult figure, a reminder of a wilder, less polished era of Australian television. And for those who remembered her at her peak, one question lingered. What really drove Denise Drysdale to the edge? The unraveling didn't come all at once. It came in bursts. A heated exchange here, a disappearing act there. Denise Drysdale's decline wasn't a sudden fall from grace, but rather a slow erosion, worn down by years of pressure, unresolved trauma, and a media landscape that no longer embraced imperfection. One of the most infamous incidents came in 2017 during her time on Studio 10, a popular morning show that had cast her in a familiar role, the lovable loose cannon. But what began as playful unpredictability soon turned uncomfortable. Viewers watched as Denise lashed out on air, visibly irritated with co-hosts, forgetting lines or making jokes that fell flat, or worse, crossed the line. When she allegedly threw a sandwich at colleague Ida Buttrose during a lunch break, the tabloids had a field day. Denise denied any malicious intent, but the press branded it a meltdown. And for the networks, it was the last straw. Behind the scenes, the truth was far less comedic. Denise had been quietly battling anxiety, insomnia, and what she later described as emotional exhaustion. Years of putting on a brave face had taken their toll. The constant expectation to entertain to be the funny one had drained her. There were whispers that she had suffered panic attacks before going on set, and that producers had to adjust schedules to accommodate her needs, but none of that made it to air. Even more haunting was her admission in a rare, candid interview. When the audience goes home and the lights go out, that's when it hits you. The loneliness, the silence. It was a glimpse into a woman who had given everything to show business, only to feel increasingly abandoned by it. Her personal life offered little refuge. Denise had endured a difficult divorce, raised 2 sons largely on her own, and faced ongoing struggles with health. Friends recalled periods where she retreated completely, not answering calls, not leaving the house. Some believed she was suffering from undiagnosed depression. Others simply said she was burnt out beyond repair. Still, Denise refused to disappear quietly. In 2020, she returned briefly to television, guest starring on the very excellent Mr. Dundee and making sporadic appearances at events. Her spirit was still there, fierce, funny, irreverent, but the fire had dimmed. Audiences no longer saw the wild girl from Commotion or the sharp-tongued queen of daytime TV. They saw a woman who had survived the unforgiving spotlight of fame, but not without scars. Media retrospectives began re-examining her legacy, with some labeling her as a pioneer of unscripted television, a woman who dared to be real in an industry obsessed with control. Others weren't so kind, calling her difficult, erratic, even dangerous. But behind every headline, there was a complicated truth. Denise Drysdale wasn't broken. She was bruised by the very system that once celebrated her. And while fans laughed at her quips and gasped at her scandals, very few ever paused to ask, what did all of this cost her? In the dim corridors of television studios, where the air still hums with the echo of old laughter, Denise Drysdale's name remains etched, not just in ratings and reruns, but in whispered recollections and uncomfortable truths. For all the comedic chaos she brought on screen, there was something far more raw behind it. A woman who couldn't, or wouldn't, play by the rules, even when it cost her everything. The dark truth, finally laid bare, was this. Denise was not the villain of her own story, but the byproduct of an industry that both created and consumed her. From her teenage years, she had been molded for entertainment, trained to dance, to sing, to smile, to perform, but never taught how to pause, to say no, to protect herself. Her entire identity had been shaped around applause. And when the applause faded, what remained was a crushing silence she was never prepared for. Former colleagues have since opened up, cautiously, about their experiences. Some speak of her generosity, her kindness to junior crew members, her infectious energy when the cameras rolled. Others remember a woman pushed to breaking point, lashing out because no one ever asked how she was doing. One producer recalled finding her crying alone in her dressing room minutes before going live, only to watch her step on stage and deliver a flawless performance. It was like she could flick a switch, he said. But that kind of power comes at a price. And that price manifested in public meltdowns, inappropriate jokes made not out of malice, but out of desperation. Moments where the line between character and person blurred beyond repair. Denise once said in an offhand remark, "If you're not laughing, you're crying, and I'd rather crack a joke than let anyone see me crack." It sounded like a punchline, but it was really a cry for help. The media was ruthless. For every time she stumbled, they were there with headlines. the sandwich throwing story became a national punchline, with few outlets taking the time to explore the exhaustion behind it. No one asked what decades of pressure had done to her nervous system. No one cared that she might have been fighting just to show up. Yet through it all, the public clung to her, not just out of nostalgia, but because she represented something real. In a sea of polished, PR-groomed personalities, Denise was gloriously flawed. She messed up, she spoke out of turn, she aged on screen without apology, and in doing so, she gave permission for others to be imperfect too. In her later years, Denise became something of a ghost in the industry. Still alive, still revered, but rarely seen. She turned down interviews. She declined reality TV offers. She focused on her family, her garden, and the few friends who had stood by her when the cameras turned away. There was a quiet dignity in her retreat, as if she had finally taken back the one thing she had never been allowed: control. Because the truth wasn't that Denise Drysdale was too wild, too difficult, or too broken. The truth was that she was too human for an industry that preferred its women polished, quiet, and disposable once they'd served their time. At Aussie Uncovered, we believe Denise Drysdale's story is more than just television nostalgia. It's a raw, unfiltered look at what happens when fame, pressure, and authenticity collide in one woman's life. Hers isn't just a story of a star who shone brightly and then flickered. It's the story of someone who gave everything to entertain a nation and was nearly broken by the demands that came with it. We don't see Denise as a collection of controversies or punchlines. We see a woman who held up decades of Australian entertainment on her back, dancing, singing, joking, hosting, often while masking personal pain that few ever bothered to ask about. Yes, she was wild. Yes, she was unpredictable. But beneath the surface was a person constantly wrestling with being too much for an industry that wanted her only when she was perfectly packaged. She wasn't perfect, and that's exactly why she mattered. In a world of media-trained smiles and rehearsed lines, Denise gave us the real thing, even when it was messy, even when it was uncomfortable. She broke the mold of the TV hostess. She laughed too loud, she spoke too freely, she aged on screen without apology, and for that, she paid a price. In headlines, in isolation, in being quietly phased out by a system that didn't know how to handle her truth. And yet, despite all of it, she endured. Denise never played the victim. She didn't write a tell-all. She simply kept going. Then one day, she stopped. She faded from screens not with a scandal, but with silence. Not because she had nothing left to give, but perhaps because she had given too much already. Here at Aussie Uncovered, we don't just revisit the stars. We uncover the people they were when the cameras stopped. And with Denise Drysdale, we see a woman who was never afraid to be herself, even when the world punished her for it. Now, we ask you, what do you truly remember about Denise? Was it her jokes, her chaos, or her courage to show up, time and time again, as no one else but herself? There's something about Denise Drysdale that lingers, not just in reruns or archived interviews, but in the memory of a nation that once laughed with her every morning. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, her presence still hums like a forgotten melody, half joyful, half haunting. Her legacy isn't just the awards or the unforgettable moments on live TV. It's the cultural permission she gave to be messy, to be loud, to be female and flawed on a stage that demanded perfection. Before authenticity became a marketing buzzword, Denise was already living it. Unpolished, uncensored, and sometimes unbearably human. She belongs to a generation of entertainers who weren't protected by PR teams or social media filters. Every mistake was public. Every outburst, magnified. But every laugh she gave us, that was real too. And for so many viewers, she wasn't just a personality. She was a constant, a familiar voice echoing through kitchens and lounge rooms across decades of change. There's a bittersweetness to looking back. We remember the wild laughter of The Ernie Sigley Show, the unpredictable magic of Studio 10, and even the tabloid storms that followed her like a shadow. But most of all, we remember the woman, fierce, funny, broken, brave. The one who made us laugh even when inside she was struggling to stay upright. And maybe that's what makes her unforgettable. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Denise Drysdale wasn't just a face on the screen. She was a mirror, showing us both the joy and the cost of being truly, fearlessly alive under the lights.